People look at my life and think I'm lucky. That's the word they use. Lucky. A husband, 2 kids, a home in a quiet neighborhood outside Phoenix, Arizona, family photos on the wall, holiday dinners, stability. From the outside, it looks like success. But no one talks about how painful it is to live inside a life that looks perfect while you're quietly falling apart. My name is Stephanie, and this is the story I never thought I'd tell out loud. I was raised to believe that being a good woman meant being agreeable. Don't argue. Don't complain. Don't be difficult. My mother used to say, men don't like women who ask for too much, so I learned early how to want less. I grew up in a working class family. My parents weren't cruel, but they were emotionally unavailable. Love was shown through responsibility, not affection. You were praised for being helpful. You were corrected for being emotional. So I became useful. At school, I was the girl teachers trusted. At home, I was the daughter who never caused problems. I learned that silence earned approval and approval felt like love. By the time I was in my 20s, I didn't know how to express my needs without guilt. That's when I met Mark. He was confident, grounded, certain. He had opinions, plans, direction, everything I lacked. He chose me, and that choice felt like validation. When he proposed, everyone said the same thing. You're so lucky. I believed them. Marriage didn't change overnight. It faded slowly. At first, it was small things. Conversations turned practical instead of personal. Affection became routine. Listening became nodding. When I tried to talk about feeling overwhelmed, Mark would say, "You worry too much." When I said I felt lonely, he'd say, "You have everything you need," and maybe I did. But I didn't feel seen. I thought having children would fix it. People always say babies bring couples closer. What they don't say is how much they expose the cracks that were already there. Motherhood consumed me, my body, my sleep, my identity. I loved my children deeply, but I lost myself quietly. I became the default parent, the planner, the fixer, the emotional center of the household. Mark worked. I handled everything else. And when I was exhausted, he called me strong. But strength without support becomes a burden. I stopped recognizing the woman in the mirror. I was constantly tired, constantly irritable, constantly guilty for feeling ungrateful. Because how could I complain? Nothing was wrong. And that's what made it so hard. I wasn't being abused. I wasn't being cheated on. I wasn't being abandoned. I was being overlooked. Ignored in subtle ways that don't leave bruises but leave scars all the same. I remember one night standing in the kitchen after everyone went to bed. The house was quiet, clean, still. I felt empty. I asked myself a question that scared me. If this is the rest of my life, can I survive it? Not dramatically, not loudly, but quietly the way women are taught to. That was the night I realized something important. You can do everything right and still lose yourself. And that realization was the beginning of everything falling apart. I didn't notice when it started happening, not really. Losing yourself doesn't arrive with an announcement. It comes quietly, disguised as responsibility. At first, I told myself I was just tired. Everyone says motherhood is exhausting. Everyone says marriage takes work. I thought this was just what adulthood felt like. But exhaustion became my normal. I woke up already tired. Went to bed feeling guilty for everything I didn't finish. My mind was never quiet. Even rest felt like something I had to earn. I was the one who remembered appointments, the one who packed lunches, the one who noticed when the kids were sad, the one who smoothed over arguments, kept the peace, made sure everything kept moving. And slowly, I stopped asking for anything in return. Mark didn't ask me to disappear. That's the part that's hardest to explain. He didn't demand silence. He didn't forbid emotions. He just didn't notice. When I talked about my day, he'd listen halfway. When I shared fears, he'd offer solutions instead of comfort. When I cried, he'd grow uncomfortable. "Let's not make this a big thing," he'd say. So I learned not to. I learned to swallow words, to push feelings down, to tell myself I was overreacting. I became the woman who was easy to be married to, and people praised me for it. Friends said I was lucky to have such a stable marriage. Family said I handled everything so well. Even Mark would say, "I don't know how you do it all." But admiration is not the same as care. Late at night, when the house finally went quiet, I'd sit alone on the couch scrolling through my phone watching other women laugh, travel, speak freely. I wondered when I stopped feeling alive. I remember one afternoon clearly. The kids were at school. Mark was at work. I stood in the kitchen staring at a sink full of dishes and suddenly started crying, not because of the dishes, but because I didn't recognize my own sadness. It felt too big for something so small. That scared me. I tried to talk to Mark again, this time more directly. I feel lonely, I said. I feel like I'm carrying everything. I don't feel like myself anymore. He looked surprised, almost offended. I don't understand, he said. I work hard. I provide. What more do you want? I didn't have a clear answer, because what I wanted wasn't tangible. I wanted to feel chosen again. I wanted to feel held emotionally, not just physically. I wanted my pain to matter without being justified. Instead, I felt like I was asking for something unreasonable. That night, I lay awake next to him, staring at the ceiling, realizing something painful. I had married someone who loved me but didn't know me. And maybe that was partly my fault. I had never shown him the real me. I had been too busy being agreeable, capable, low maintenance. I had built my marriage the same way I built my childhood survival, by being useful. Weeks turned into months. I stopped bringing things up. It felt easier to stay quiet than to keep explaining myself to someone who couldn't hear me. But silence has consequences. I became resentful, withdrawn, numb. I smiled through family dinners while feeling invisible. I laughed at jokes while feeling hollow. I fulfilled roles while losing my sense of self. Sometimes I fantasized about running away, not to another person, but to a version of myself that felt real again. That fantasy made me feel ashamed. What kind of woman dreams of escape from a good life? I told myself to be grateful, but gratitude without honesty becomes a prison. I started noticing how often women around me felt the same way. Tired, overwhelmed, quietly unhappy yet afraid to say it out loud. We all pretended this was normal, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I wasn't just tired, I was disappearing. And the scariest part, no one noticed because I made it look so easy. People think breaking down looks dramatic. They imagine screaming arguments, slammed doors, or walking out with a suitcase in the middle of the night. Mine didn't look like that. Mine looked like waking up one morning and realizing I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no joy, just numbness. It happened on a regular weekday. The kids were getting ready for school. Mark was rushing out the door. Everyone needed something from me, and I was giving it automatically, like muscle memory. I poured cereal, signed papers, answered questions, and suddenly, I felt like I was watching myself from outside my body. I remember thinking, if I disappeared today, this routine would still happen. Someone else would step in, and no one would notice the difference. That thought terrified me, because it wasn't about wanting to die. It was about realizing I didn't feel alive. I had spent so many years being the glue that held everything together that I forgot I was a person, not a role. After everyone left, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was silent, the kind of silence that makes you hear your own thoughts too clearly. My hands started shaking. I tried to calm myself down, told myself I was overreacting, that I was just tired, that other women handled more, but my body didn't listen. My chest tightened, my breathing felt shallow. Tears came out of nowhere, heavy, uncontrollable. I slid down onto the floor and cried harder than I had in years. Not for one thing, for everything. For the girl who learned to be quiet. For the woman who learned to endure. For the years I spent shrinking so others could stay comfortable. I realized then that I had been emotionally abandoned, not just by my marriage, but by myself. That afternoon, I called my sister. I almost hung up before she answered. When she asked how I was, I said, "I don't think I'm okay." Those words felt dangerous, like opening a door I'd kept locked for decades. She listened quietly as I stumbled through my feelings. How lonely I felt, how invisible, how exhausted. When I finished, she said something that cracked something open inside me. "You've been strong for so long," she said. "But who's been strong for you?" No one. That answer hurt more than anything. A week later, I found myself sitting in a therapist's office, staring at a box of tissues, feeling embarrassed for needing help. But the therapist didn't rush me, didn't fix me, didn't tell me to be grateful. She asked simple questions. When did you stop feeling like yourself? What do you need that you're not getting? What are you afraid would happen if you spoke up? I didn't have answers right away, but the questions stayed with me. I started noticing things I had ignored for years. How often I apologized unnecessarily. How uncomfortable I felt expressing needs. How I measured my worth by how useful I was to others. I realized I had built my entire life around being needed, not being known. And that realization hurt. I tried to talk to Mark again. This time, I didn't soften it. "I'm not okay," I said. "I feel empty. I feel invisible. I feel like I'm disappearing." He looked overwhelmed. "I don't know how to help you," he said. "You're the strong one." That sentence landed heavier than he probably realized, because I didn't want to be the strong one anymore. I wanted to be human. We went quiet after that conversation. Not angry quiet, disconnected quiet. Two people living side by side, speaking different emotional languages. I started imagining what my life would look like if nothing changed. 10 more years of this. 20. The thought made my chest tighten again. I realized something, then something terrifying and freeing at the same time. Staying wasn't neutral. Staying was a choice. And it was costing me my sense of self. I didn't know yet what I was going to do. I didn't have a plan. I didn't feel brave. But for the first time, I admitted the truth. This life, as it was slowly killing me. Not loudly, not violently, but quietly. And I couldn't pretend not to hear it anymore. I wish I could tell you that healing happened quickly. That one brave conversation fixed everything. That clarity arrived overnight. That choosing myself felt empowering right away. It didn't. At first, choosing myself felt like betrayal. I felt guilty for wanting more. Guilty for being unhappy in a life others admired. Guilty for questioning a marriage that wasn't abusive, just empty. But pain doesn't need permission to exist. Once I acknowledged how deeply unhappy I was, I couldn't unsee it. I started therapy regularly, not to fix my marriage but to understand myself. For the first time in my life, someone asked me what I wanted and waited for an answer. At first, all I could say was, "I don't know." That answer scared me. How could I live for decades of life and not know what I wanted? But my therapist told me something that stayed with me. "You spent your life surviving. Now you're learning to live." Slowly, I started noticing things. How I loved walking alone in the evenings. How music felt deeper when I listened without multitasking. How freeing it felt to say no without explaining. I wasn't becoming someone new. I was remembering someone old. Mark noticed the changes. I spoke more honestly. I stopped smoothing over discomfort. I stopped pretending everything was fine. At first, he resisted. "You've changed," he said. "Yes," I replied, "because I had to." We tried counseling together. We tried conversations that were awkward and raw and exhausting. Some days felt hopeful. Other days felt painfully distant. And eventually, I had to face a truth I'd been avoiding. Love alone is not enough when emotional safety is missing. I didn't leave because I hated him. I left because staying meant abandoning myself again. Telling the kids was the hardest thing I've ever done. I worried they'd blame me, that I'd scar them, that I was being selfish. But something unexpected happened. They saw me breathe again. They saw me laugh, really laugh. They saw me cry without hiding. They saw me choose honesty over silence. And I realized something powerful. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is model self-respect. Life after leaving wasn't easy. There were lonely nights, financial fears, moments of doubt so loud they almost pulled me back. But there was also peace, quiet mornings where I didn't feel heavy, moments where I felt present in my own body, a growing trust in myself. Healing didn't erase my past, but it softened it. I stopped blaming the girl who learned to survive by being small. I forgave the woman who stayed longer than she should have. I honored the strength it took to finally choose herself. Today, I'm still healing, but I am no longer disappearing. And if you're listening to this story and seeing yourself in pieces of it, please hear this. You are not dramatic for wanting more. You are not ungrateful for feeling empty. You are not weak for needing emotional connection. Your pain is real, and you deserve a life where you are not just useful but seen. Questions for you: comment below. Have you ever felt lonely while surrounded by people? Have you stayed in a relationship because it looked good from the outside? At what point does endurance turn into self-betrayal? What would choosing yourself look like right now? Your story matters too. Share your thoughts in the comments. You're not alone here. Subscribe for more true stories. If this story touched you, subscribe for more real, emotional stories from women who survived, healed, and found their voice. New stories every week. Real lives, real pain, real healing. Thank you for listening.